Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Connecting with God. Today, we're going to talk about being earnest. So, what is earnest? Well, earnest, a lot of times we think about being a down payment. My wife and I, during COVID, in order to get a car, we had to put down earnest money. The car wasn't in yet, and a lot of people wanted it, so you had to give them a pledge that you were really serious about buying this car. But earnest also has a different definition. And that definition is something with intense desire or intense conviction. And so what we're going to look at today are ways in which we need to have intense conviction as far as the New Testament is concerned. So let's get started. First, we need to be earnest in our study. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 1 says, "Therefore we must give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest we drift away." Now, earlier in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 1, it had told us that God has spoken to us through His Son, Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ's words sometimes were difficult to take. But the Apostle Peter in John chapter 6, verse 68 said, "Lord, you have the words of life." And because Jesus has the words of life, then we have to give intense conviction to those words. In fact, in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 3, it asks a rhetorical question. It says, "How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at the first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by those who heard Him?" We need to be earnest. We need to have an intense conviction to study. But next, we also need to be earnest in prayer. Now, it's really interesting how we need to be earnest in different things. Again, we're looking at 4 in this video. But one of the maybe more surprising ones is the fact of being earnest in prayer. So we need to have intense conviction to keep praying to God. So here's what the New Testament says. In Colossians chapter 4 and verse 2, Paul wrote, "Continue earnestly in prayer, being vigilant in it with thanksgiving." Even James reminds us, he said in James chapter 5, verse 16, "The effective fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much." And then finally in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 17, Paul simply said, "Pray without ceasing." So without ceasing means that we continue in prayer, just like Colossians 4, chapter 4, verse 2 says. What does this mean? It means we need an intense conviction to keep on praying. And I love the fact 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 12 tells us that God always has His ears open to our prayer. What a magnificent promise. But it's there only if you're earnest in your prayer. Now, the third one is an interesting one. We need to be earnest in our contention. Now, a lot of times people think that contention is very negative because it brings up argumentation and getting angry and having fusses and fights. But that's not the way that the New Testament uses it. In Jude verse 3, Jude wrote, "Contend earnestly for the faith that has been delivered once for all to the saints." Now, we've talked about what earnestly means, that intense conviction. But what does contend mean? Well, contend means to struggle. It's an intense working to try to understand what the gospel is. In fact, it was often used of an athletic contest. Paul, when he spoke of himself in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verses 24 through 27, he brought up the fact that to make sure that he didn't fall away, he has to struggle. He has to beat him. So he has to buffet his body. You know, it was a struggle. He was contending with himself and with his inner desires that makes him want to pull away from the gospel. So we have to contend earnestly for that gospel. Some people, and it's so easy to do, They want to pervert the gospel because honestly, a perverted gospel is a much more welcoming gospel to a lot of people. So they pervert it, but we cannot pervert it and be right with God. That was the point in Galatians chapter 1 and verses 6 through 9. If it's another gospel, if it's a perverted gospel, then it's really not a gospel at all. So therefore, what we have to do is that we have to stand with truth. Our intense conviction must be for truth. Paul summed it up, I think, very well in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 16. Take heed to yourself and to the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this you will both save yourself and those who hear you. So continuing in this, taking heed to it, what does that call for? It calls for earnestness. It calls for your intense conviction. So the final one is that we need to be earnest in our hope. Because as we live this life, as we put away unrighteousness, as we put on the new man, as we are baptized into Jesus Christ, and we are doing the very best that we can to be holy people, we know that we're going to have problems. We know that we're going to have struggles. But what awaits for us at the end is a glorified spiritual body. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and the second verse, here's how Paul put it. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation which is from heaven. So that habitation which is from heaven is that new spiritual body. So as we pass from this life, we go into the grave. And then at the end of time, Jesus had said in John chapter 5 and verses 28 and 29 that we will come up from those graves and we will be changed. Paul also mentions this in the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We will be changed, and we'll be changed from this physical state into this spiritual one. Now that spiritual change literally happens when we give up the body in physical death. So in that interim time, we are, as the New Testament tells us, specifically Jesus even in Luke chapter 16, that we await that time in Hades, but we're given a new spiritual body at the judgment. We're given this new existence. And in this new existence, we hope for it because we're able to put away all of the painful things that we have on this life. While we're in this body, we're absent from the Lord, but at some point in the future, we're going to be with the Lord. And how are you with the Lord? You're with the Lord through that new body. And that's what we hope for. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 8, Paul expresses these thoughts as he writes, "We are confident, yes, well pleased, rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord." So in the end, you're going to be present with the Lord, but you're present with the Lord with a new hope, a new realization, a new existence, a new spiritual body. And for all of the people who suffer, for all of the people who know that life is incredibly difficult, they have that earnest hope, that intense conviction that one day we will be clothed with that new body. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of days where I really, really look forward to this. In fact, I look forward to it so much that just as Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 2, I have this earnest, this intense conviction to be with God. So the Lord doesn't want anyone to be lukewarm. He had warned the church at Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3 and verses 15 and 16 about being lukewarm and about the fact of when you are lukewarm, He spits you out of His mouth. What does He want? He wants people with intense conviction. He wants people who are earnest. He wants people who really care about being the finest, best servants of God that they can possibly be. And that's why we present material like this. We want to appeal to everyone that if your zeal for the Lord has kind of slowed down, you need to find a way to rekindle it. Get yourself with a group of saints, and those group of saints who get out and do, and they serve the Lord, and they serve other people. They love God fully. They love their fellow man. Get connected with those people. Let them kind of show you the way to getting that earnest spirit back within you. We would love for you to be at the Loop 287 Church of Christ if you're in our area of the world. But if not, please find saints that will push you, that will help you, that will encourage you to be earnest in your service. When you are earnest in your service, I promise you will find all of the riches that Christ intended for you. Thank you for watching today. We appreciate always the wonderful input that we receive on YouTube, and we want to make sure that if you want to study a different topic, then leave us a comment below or send us an email at info@lawofliberty.com. Let us help you to find better spiritual understanding. That's why this channel exists, and this is why we do this. So make sure that you like this video. That will help it get in front of more people who are looking for spiritual understanding. Subscribe to the channel, watch for the new content, and as always, give us feedback. But thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you watching it. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you next time.